Doris Miller, known to history as Dorie, was born on October 12, 1919, in Waco, Texas. He grew up in a working-class African-American family, the third of four sons born to Connery and Henrietta Miller, who worked as sharecroppers. Life in rural Texas during the 1920s was hard, and racial segregation shaped every aspect of society. From an early age, Dorie learned the value of discipline and strength through his family's labor-intensive lifestyle. In school, Miller was known for his quiet personality but strong sense of responsibility. He left high school early to help support his family during the Great Depression, taking small jobs in and around Waco. Standing over 6 feet tall and weighing more than 200 pounds, he was both athletic and dependable. Many expected him to find work in farming or manual labor, but Dorie wanted something bigger, a stable career and a chance to see the world. In 1939, at age 19, Miller enlisted in the U.S. Navy, one of the few career paths open to black men at the time. However, the Navy's racial policies were deeply restrictive. African-American sailors were not allowed to serve in combat or technical roles. They were confined to service positions, cooks, stewards, and mess attendants. Dorie accepted the position of mess attendant third class and began his training in Norfolk, Virginia. Despite the limited opportunities, Miller took pride in his work and earned respect for his dedication and physical strength. His commanding officers noticed his calm nature and reliability. He was later assigned to the battleship USS West Virginia, anchored at Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. Though he was trained to serve meals and clean, no one, including Dorie himself, could have imagined that within 2 years he would become one of the most unlikely heroes of World War II. By 1940, Dorie Miller had settled into life aboard the USS West Virginia, a Colorado-class battleship stationed at Pearl Harbor. The massive ship, often called the WWII by its crew, was home to over 1,400 sailors. Miller's duties were routine but demanding, serving meals, maintaining the officers' quarters, and assisting in the ship's galley. Despite the racial segregation that shaped his naval life, Miller earned the respect of both white and black crewmen for his reliability and work ethic. He became known for his size and strength. During drills, he helped carry heavy supplies with ease, and his shipmates often remarked that Dorie could lift anything. In his off hours, he took part in boxing matches organized aboard the ship. His skill and power in the ring led him to win the title of the ship's heavyweight boxing champion. To many on board, he was a gentle giant, quiet, respectful, but fiercely determined. Life in the Navy wasn't easy for black sailors. Miller and others faced discrimination daily. They slept in separate quarters, ate in different sections, and were rarely considered for promotion beyond service ranks. Yet Miller remained loyal to his post and determined to perform his duties with pride. His belief was simple: if he worked hard and stayed disciplined, opportunities might eventually come. In 1941, tensions between the United States and Japan were rising, but the sailors at Pearl Harbor still lived with a sense of calm routine. Each day began early, with inspections, meals, and training exercises under the Hawaiian sun. For Miller, it was just another chapter of duty. He had no idea that the calm waters of Pearl Harbor would soon erupt into chaos, and his name would be written into history as a hero born from crisis. It was a quiet Sunday morning aboard the USS West Virginia. The date was December 7, 1941, and the sun had just risen over Pearl Harbor. Sailors were going about their morning routines, some preparing for breakfast, others still resting in their bunks. Doris, or Dorie Miller, had finished serving the morning meal and was collecting laundry when the air was suddenly filled with the deep drone of aircraft engines. At first, many thought it was a routine drill. Then came the unmistakable sound of explosions. Within seconds, the calm harbor transformed into a nightmare. Japanese dive bombers and torpedo planes swooped down in waves, unleashing destruction on the U.S. Pacific Fleet. The USS West Virginia took direct hits almost immediately. Miller rushed to the deck, confused but ready to help. Fire and smoke covered the horizon as the battleship USS Arizona exploded nearby, sending shock waves through the harbor. On the West Virginia, torpedoes ripped through the hull, throwing men into the water and igniting massive fires. Miller, unarmed and untrained for combat, didn't hesitate. He began pulling wounded sailors to safety, dragging them through smoke and flames toward safer sections of the ship. Amid the chaos, he made his way to the bridge to assist the mortally wounded Captain Mervyn Benyon. Despite shrapnel wounds, Miller tried to move the captain to cover, refusing to leave him behind. The deck was covered in debris, gunfire, and burning oil, yet Miller's focus was on saving as many men as he could. When an officer ordered him to help man an unattended .50 caliber anti-aircraft machine gun, Miller climbed up without hesitation, even though he had never been trained to use one. The quiet mess attendant was about to become a legend. As the attack intensified, the USS West Virginia shook violently under the relentless assault. Flames spread across the deck, and the sky above Pearl Harbor roared with the sound of Japanese planes. In the midst of the chaos, Dorie Miller stood behind the .5 caliber Browning anti-aircraft gun, a weapon he had never been trained to use. The officer beside him gave a quick set of instructions, but there was no time for practice. Within seconds, Miller gripped the handles, steadied his breath, and began firing. Each pull of the trigger unleashed a burst of thunder that echoed across the harbor. Tracers arced into the sky, cutting through the smoke as Miller tracked the enemy aircraft. His focus was absolute. He led each target with remarkable instinct, something only experienced gunners usually mastered. Witnesses later recalled seeing enemy planes dive through his line of fire and spiral down in flames. Miller continued firing until he exhausted every round available. Despite explosions nearby and the deck around him tearing apart, he stood firm, refusing to retreat. He had no helmet, no formal combat role, just raw courage and instinct. One sailor later said, "Miller wasn't supposed to be there, but thank God he was." When the ammunition finally ran out, Miller didn't stop. He returned to rescuing injured sailors, dragging them away from burning oil slicks and collapsing bulkheads. His uniform was covered in smoke and ash, his hands raw from burns and recoil, but he worked tirelessly. By the time the attack ended, the West Virginia was sinking, its decks twisted and blackened. Nearly 100 of her crew were dead, but many survived, thanks to Dorie Miller's actions. That day, the Navy cook became a symbol of bravery that crossed both rank and race. When the smoke cleared over Pearl Harbor, the once proud harbor looked like a floating graveyard. Ships burned, smoke rose miles into the sky, and the water shimmered black with oil and debris. The USS West Virginia lay crippled, half submerged, her crew shaken but alive, thanks in no small part to one man who had done far more than anyone expected of him. Dorie Miller, still covered in soot and sweat, quietly returned below deck to help where he could. He asked for no recognition, no attention, just kept working to save others. In the days that followed, survivors began telling the story. Sailors spoke of the cook who had manned a gun and shot down enemy planes with deadly precision. Officers confirmed it. The untrained man who had taken command of an anti-aircraft gun and fought back when everyone else was diving for cover. When the Navy gathered reports of heroism from that morning, Miller's name kept surfacing, the man who refused to die quietly. On December 15, 1941, Admiral Chester Nimitz personally presented Miller with the Navy Cross, the third highest decoration for valor. Standing on the deck of the USS Enterprise, Nimitz declared, "This marks the first time in this conflict that such high tribute has been made to a member of his race in the Navy." For Miller, it was never about medals. When asked about his actions, he simply said, "I just pulled the trigger and did what I had to do." But across America, newspapers carried his story, a black sailor who had faced death and fought back. To a nation still divided by race, his courage was undeniable proof that heroism knows no color, and that even a cook could rise above the fire and change history. After receiving the Navy Cross, Dorie Miller's name spread across America. He became a powerful symbol, not just of bravery under fire, but of equality and the unshakable spirit of those often overlooked. Newspapers across the country printed his photo, a humble sailor standing at attention, eyes steady, chest proud, his Navy Cross pinned just above his heart. For millions of African Americans, he became a living example that courage and skill were not defined by race or rank. The U.S. Navy used his image for recruitment posters under the slogan, "Above and beyond the call of duty." Yet even with fame, Miller remained modest. He refused to act like a celebrity, telling reporters that he was just doing what anyone else would have done. But his recognition carried far beyond him. It stirred conversations within military ranks and among civil rights leaders about the glaring racial inequalities still embedded in the armed forces. While others might have used their fame to retire safely, Miller did not. He requested to return to active duty, refusing to hide behind his newfound reputation. "I still have work to do," he said simply. The Navy assigned him to the escort carrier USS Liscum Bay, part of the Pacific Fleet. Even as his legend grew, he went back to being what he always was, a sailor, doing his job with quiet pride. Across the U.S., his story inspired war bond drives, parades, and songs. Children learned his name in classrooms. For many, Dorie Miller represented something much greater than one man. He embodied the idea that heroism, when tested by fire, could rise from any rank, any background, and any skin color. But fate, as it had at Pearl Harbor, would once again find him at sea. In November 1943, Dorie Miller was serving aboard the escort carrier USS Liscum Bay, part of Task Force 52 during the Battle of Makin in the Gilbert Islands. The ship carried over 900 men, supporting U.S. forces pushing deeper into Japanese-held territory. For Miller, now a seasoned sailor and a symbol of courage, it was just another day of service. He performed his duties quietly, maintaining his post as a cook and assisting with ship operations. The same humility he had shown since Pearl Harbor. But before dawn on November 24, 1943, tragedy struck again. The Japanese submarine I-175 launched a spread of torpedoes at the task force. At 5:10 a.m., one torpedo slammed into the Liscombe Bay's starboard side, hitting near the ship's bomb storage. The explosion was catastrophic. A chain reaction tore through the carrier, igniting aviation fuel and munitions. The blast was so violent that nearby ships reported a fireball rising hundreds of feet into the air. Within 23 minutes, the Liscombe Bay sank beneath the Pacific. Of the 916 crew aboard, only 272 survived. Doris Miller was not among them. He was last seen helping wounded sailors escape the burning deck, showing the same selfless instinct that had defined his actions 2 years earlier at Pearl Harbor. His body was never recovered. The U.S. Navy officially listed Miller as missing in action, later presumed dead. The war had claimed one of its most unlikely heroes, a man who had risen from ship's cook to national icon, defying prejudice and fear to protect his fellow sailors. Dorie Miller's final moments were never fully known, but those who survived said one thing with certainty. Even as the Liscombe Bay went down, Miller was still helping others, calm, steady, and unafraid.
In the years after the war, the name Dorie Miller, became more than a Navy legend. It became a symbol of courage that broke through the barriers of race and recognition. Though he had perished in the Pacific, his story refused to sink with him. Newspapers across America wrote of the Negro cook who fought back, inspiring millions of Black Americans who had long been excluded from glory despite their loyalty and sacrifice. In 1944, the Navy awarded Miller the Navy Cross, presented personally by Admiral Chester W. Nimitz, the first time in U.S. history an African American received that honor. Standing at attention, Nimitz said, "This marks the first time such high tribute has come to a member of his race in the Pacific Fleet, but I'm sure it will not be the last." Miller's heroism became a rallying point for civil rights advocates who argued that bravery and patriotism had no color. His actions at Pearl Harbor and his death aboard the Liscombe Bay fueled demands for the Navy to end segregation, and eventually they did. By 1948, President Harry S. Truman signed Executive Order 9981, desegregating the U.S. military. Over the decades, Dorie Miller's legacy continued to grow. Schools, streets, and naval buildings were named in his honor. In 2020, nearly 80 years after Pearl Harbor, the U.S. Navy announced that a new aircraft carrier, USS Doris Miller, CVN-81, would bear his name, making him the first African American and the first enlisted sailor to receive that honor. From a humble farm in Waco, Texas, to the deck of a battleship under fire, Dorie Miller's story remains a timeless reminder. Real heroism isn't about rank or uniform. It's about courage when the world needs it most.